I apologize. I got cut off on our last video. So let's go back and continue with our aggression and mass media slides. So one of the things that I wanted to show you on here is that we also need to take into account prior aggression. And so when this chart particularly here takes a look at both males and females' prior aggression and then plots it against the prevalence then of subsequent aggressive acts. Unsurprisingly, those individuals who had prior aggression are going to show more aggression than those that had no prior aggression. But what's interesting here is our males with prior aggression, if we take a look at their line, it is significantly higher in terms of prevalence. And men in general, even men with no prior aggression, seem to have a prevalence percentage that is higher than our females with prior aggression. While we might say that there is some parts of this that slightly overlap, it still seems to be that men are evidencing more aggressive behavior than women. We can kind of go into discussions about why that might be, some of which might actually be related more to sort of social context, gender roles, acceptable behavior between men and women. Another interesting study that we find in your book is looking at aggressive responses during free play after watching an aggressive TV program. So they had both boys and girls watch Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. For those of you who are familiar with that show from the 90s, it definitely did have violence. The premise of the show is killing and hurting bad guys. And then they had another group that did not watch Power Rangers, and then they watched them during free play. The boys that watched Power Rangers, as you can see from this graph, have significantly more aggressive responses per minute during that free play. But here again, you see something very similar to the graph that you saw on the previous slide, which is that our boys, even though they did not watch Power Rangers, actually had more aggressive responses during free play as compared to our girls. So there's something there about watching aggressive behavior that does in fact influence subsequent aggressive behavior, but there's also something that's related to boys in particular evidencing more aggression as compared to their female counterparts. One kind of idea that your book goes into is, if I engage in this media violence, does it influence me? If I'm watching it, can't I just watch it and walk away, right? Particularly, I think about sort of new age reality television shows where watching that aggression, people say, well, I watch it because I don't have that kind of drama in my life, but, seeing that relational aggression, I just like to watch it, but I don't engage in it, right? And what they're sort of alluding to is kind of a catharsis that if I watch it, I then get rid of those feelings and I don't have to act it out in my day-to-day life. The research actually suggests to us that, that's not the case. Just because I am watching something doesn't mean that all of that negative aggression will be sort of drained from me. And so, this might not be as, beneficial as we think it is, right? So watching something that's really violent doesn't make us less violent. In fact, there's some studies that show us the complete opposite. One study, looking at people who watch Jersey Shore, were actually more likely to behave aggressively to a Confederate as compared to those participants who watched kind of a benign show, America's like Funniest Animals or something like that. Another theory that your book talks about is social learning theory. And again, this was provided to us from Bandura. Here, the idea is if I watch something aggressive, it enhances those feelings of, aggression and antisocial inclinations, and then I might act out in that way. And the research actually suggests that is probably what happens, right? So Bandura had the famous Bobo doll experiment, hitting that doll, beating that doll, and kind of seeing what happened as a result of that. And then children, if you recall from the original experiment, children who saw that aggression were more likely to then come up with novel ways of aggressing on that doll. So in addition to engaging in the same aggressive behavior, they created new ways to behave aggressively to the doll. And so, one of the ideas is that television serves as sort of this aggressive model that teaches us how to act sort of violently, right? So here's an example of this. This is from a study from 1988. In Los Angeles, a housemaid caught a 7-year-old boy in the act of sprinkling around glass into a family's yard. There was no malice behind the act. It was purely experimental, having been inspired by curiosity to learn whether it would really work as well as it did on television. And I think we just need to remember that particularly when younger children are watching aggression, they can't always process it in the same way that adults can. They don't really know what that aggression sort of looks like. They can't cognitively comprehend it in the same way that an adult can. This becomes even more convoluted when we start thinking about a premise of justified violence. So oftentimes when we have violence on, a cartoon or even a television show, we often have this violence by a good guy. And so when you're doing that, it's the belief that, well, if you're doing it in the name of good, then that violence is okay. Ultimately, though, violence is just violence, right? And so as an example of this, when my brother was younger, in Indian movies, they used to have different scenes where the good guy would beat up all the bad guys, and they would make a pretty big to-do about it. And inevitably, he would see this and he would laugh. Now, in the context, again, it's a good guy hurting the bad guys. So it's almost seems like it's acceptable. If we take that away, though, he was still laughing at violence. He was still laughing at somebody getting hurt, right? And so this happens often when we think about sort of this justified violence. We also need to think about the fact that seeing violence over and over and over again can actually desensitize us. So people in general, and this has been done study after study, people in general who tend to watch a lot of media violence actually tend to become less aroused by aggression, more tolerant of violence and aggressive acts. We see this all the time. I think about school shootings or just mass shootings as an example of this. When we saw one of the first, big school shootings at Virginia Tech, people were floored. People didn't know what to do. And then slowly but surely, we have continually seen these types of things. And, my brother was saying that he was out, they were watching a game at a sports bar, and there was a shooting that had happened in Chicago. And, he was living in Chicago at the time. And he said, I overheard somebody say, oh man, it's another one. And then went about, eating their burger and their wings again. And, we just think about the fact that are we really becoming desensitized to that type of violence, right? Think about if you're binge watching CSI. So the first time you see one of the serial killers or something like that, it's kind of jarring, right? By the 20th episode, you're just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, they're going to die now, right? And so you even see that in the course of a few hours. Think about what's happening to us over the course of our lifetime, the more and more aggression that we're exposed to. Now, I don't want us to think that television is all bad. We can think about maybe pro-social behavior that we learn from educational programs. An example of this might be Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and talking about maybe more difficult topics. Mr. Rogers actually really became the sort of poster child show for talking about cooperation and being considerate of others and being helpful to others, right? So really modeling that pro-social behavior and that compassion for children. And so we can see actually some of this as positive. Aggressive children can actually become more compassionate, by watching some of these shows, but it's at the expense of, without becoming less aggressive. There are few lasting effects if adults actually don't monitor and encourage children to engage in these behaviors and enact this pro-social behavior. So what does that mean? I can watch it, I can learn about it, but it doesn't mean it's going to change me unless it's sort of reinforced thereafter. We do want pro-social behavior. Those individuals who are pro-social tend to do better academically. They tend to have better performance in high school. Long-term, they tend to get along better with their coworkers. Just in general, it's people that you want to be around, right? One of the criticisms or the big criticisms of educational programming is related to kind of children now becoming that passive recipient of information. So you might have remembered, just a little while ago, several years ago, Baby Einstein came out as a DVD. Great marketing, right? Baby Einstein. Watching these are going to help your children become little geniuses. Well, what ended up happening is that they did a study on this, unsurprisingly. Children watching the show didn't become geniuses. It didn't necessarily replace anything because you're not engaging. In fact, children who had parents who engaged them in concepts similar to what was shown on Baby Einstein tended to outperform the children who only watched Baby Einstein. So is Baby Einstein bad? No, but it really highlights for us the importance of that interaction and how much children need to have that back and forth with someone else that's going to interact with them too, right? Not sort of passively sitting there watching television. So, this is always such a very interesting debate, interesting conversation, and the amount of research that's been done on this area is actually quite staggering. So I encourage you all to spend a little bit of time maybe taking a look at some research articles, seeing if there's anything that sort of speaks to you, something that's a little bit more novel and new, and maybe we can discuss it in class when we're together again. All right, so that leaves us with our sort of condensed lecture for this chapter. Of course, I'll be going over additional material in class, and as always, I am happy to answer any questions that you have. So with that, I'll go ahead and sign off for today, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a good one. Bye.